When done right, war films are brutal. A sense of horror and helplessness troubles the ordinary mind, and through anxiety-riddled eyes, we watch the decay of soldiers to the propensity of violence until there is a ray of hope. This is in fact the structure of many war films I've come across, and they follow it pretty well, to the point where the story becomes embedded into our memories. However, perspectives are everything. If a movie could break this structure to be unique, successfully offer a different perspective of war, from this uniqueness could emerge a story so realistic and heartfelt that it could well be considered as a one-of-one, perhaps the greatest story of war ever told. Fireflies are beautiful creatures. They emanate so much color and light in their existence, but so much beauty and hope in so little time to live for. Grave of the Fireflies is an allegory, a name that reveals the fragility of humanity. When asked about whether Grave of the Fireflies was an anti-war film, Isao Takahata vehemently denied such an intention. And this often feels like a shocking surprise to the audience. How could something that evokes a fervorous abhorrence to war not be anti-war? But it comes down to that change in perspective. You see, most of the war films, when stripped to the core, are in fact not much of a celebration of war either. They are in essence showing you the terror that's associated with it. So much so that war films are naturally as much anti-war as it could get. But this is where Grave of the Fireflies is different. Rather than looking through the eyes of the frontline soldiers fighting for good and evil, it offers a glance into the effects of war on the ones that are truly helpless. In many ways, Isao Takahata tells you that this is not about good or evil, or who's wrong or right. This is about the reality of war. When this story arrived in the hands of Isao Takahata, it already had a real-world characteristic to it. Nosaka Akiyuki, a survivor of the firebombings of 1945, had earlier on written the short story that painfully demonstrated the effects of the war on the innocent, including the loss of his 16-month-old stepsister. The story, perhaps overlaid with an amount of survivor's guilt, connected with Takahata, for after all, albeit short-term, he too had experienced separation from a loved one during the bombings.
後までその傷が残ったりしてましたけど、でしかもそれで親と別れて実際に親と会ったのは2日後ぐらいなんですね。やっと会えたの。
So naturally, an adamant Takahata wanted to bring justice to the story. He didn't just want the film to be a typical message, outspoken loud and clear against the evil of war, but he wanted to bring to light the true victims of war, to portray a realistic picture of the suffering. The nature of war is always something that is hidden from plain sight. It is unfathomable to scale, and in the movie, Setsuko and Sita are just two pieces of a ginormous puzzle that when put together displays the gravity of this suffering, a suffering that is instinctively human. The war is portrayed to be a threat that comes and goes, without a phase nor a timeline. The people who suffer indiscriminately are oblivious to their next meal, or even if they would survive to have it. Such a depiction of war would be non-existent in a normal setting. In fact, to fulfill the story, often there is someone to assign the blame to. In a typical war film, there is a relief that comes after a moment of redemption, or when the soldiers head back safely from an almost merciless battlefield. But even in this vulnerability, there is still a semblance of power. Soldiers are not your typical civilians. They are capable of wielding weapons and, if need be, competent of killing the problem in front of them. But although we would be unlikely to be in their boots, we empathize with their struggle as we find a common ground in the name of humanity. But in Grave of the Fireflies, this element is completely absent, as we are asked to experience the nature of war through the eyes of the civilians. The powerlessness of the situation is what regards the story to be instinctively relatable. Setsuko and Sita are just numbers in a war, and in many ways they could be you or I. And this aspect of Grave of the Fireflies is unlike anything that you'll experience. The planes are silhouettes in the distance, a symbol of a looming terror. The Emperor is an abstract name that people worship without questions. But in the middle of it all, as the world is slowly engulfed in chaos, we only get to see the fragility of the innocent and how the effects of war spreads like a disease. Setsuko and Sita are only children, and they are asked to navigate a cruel world that constantly turns apocalyptic under their noses. The effects of war follow these children wherever they go, at first taking shape in the loss of their home, followed by the tragic demise of their mother. But they can't stop, for if they do, the war would claim them too. War is complicated, and it has repercussions that are often unpredictable. In a typical war film, explosions and gunshots are your true enemies, but in Grave of the Fireflies, the raining embers are only the precursor, something that only the fortunate survives. But the real enemies comes from the design of a frailty. Hunger and disease are eventually what claims these people. But still, with sheer willpower, even the frail tries to prevail. And that is why the storytelling breaks your heart when you realize it was always an impossible task to begin with. How could two children possibly survive something so brutal? How could they live within the apocalypse? But this would only cover half of what makes this movie a timeless masterpiece. According to Takahata, if physical violence resulting in suffering through starvation and disease is a major component of a story of war, the same story should also take time to investigate the psychological violence inflicted upon humanity. With the passage of time, people get desensitized to blood and violence. With the amount of games and movies that we consume, physical acts of violence and torture, mutilated bodies and burnt corpses, these are aspects that hardly succumb people to tears. This is well and truly a normality in movies, and especially in films that are associated with war. It is almost a necessity. And this element is a recurring theme in Grave of the Fireflies also. But the person Isao Takahata was, I felt like his best attributes were always connected to the emotional side of a story, which is why in the film, the thing that actually gets through to your heart is the loss of humanity during the war. To ask the question, who is responsible for the demise of the main characters, opens up an interesting aspect of war that isn't explored that often in movies. Normally, there is a clear conflict that people try to avoid, and the enemies are well established, and once the good side is chosen, there is an expectation of assistance that comes along with it. You would presume that the good are gracious, and no matter what they do, they will care for each other. But not in Grave of the Fireflies. This is not some display of nobility, a fantasy filled with hope and inspiration, but rather, it is the state of humanity that Takahata comments on. Yes, the war happens regardless, but why was it so hard for people to empathize with two innocent children? And this is where the emotions of the movie lie. It is structured in such a way that acts of violence on screen acts as a state of terror, but the true calamity is the selfishness of humans within this state. At the very beginning of the movie, even after the war had ended, people passed by a dying Sita only to pass remarks like the dying are a disgrace, or it's disgusting to have these bodies lying around here when the Americans arrive, completely in disregard of their immediate past. But the loss of humanity is something that is emphasized much better during the war. These children are considered pests wherever they go, incapable of fighting, or just another burden to bear. The aunt shows no remorse in telling them that they are useless to her family, inevitably forcing them out of her house. The doctor, after seeing the feeble condition of Setsuko, doesn't bother getting her immediate help. And out of an existential need, when Sita steals the farmer's crops, he beats him to a pulp, failing to understand why he did what he did. Their voices throughout the film goes unheard in the cacophony of war. If this was a war against humanity, Takahata skillfully shows that it was also a war within humanity. Virtue and kindness, the bare minimum to expect in dire circumstances, completely devoid in the act of self-preservation. But yet, it might not be what Isao Takahata wants people to remember from the movie. It's not like you can accurately predict human behavior during a war. The loss of humanity might just be an unintended consequence. So he doesn't want the blame to be put on the aunt or the doctor or the farmer or even Sita, who also could have prevented their tragic fates if he wasn't as stubborn as the people around him. Even Takahata once said,
ところがセータっていう子はそれを耐えることができない、耐えないで何とかやっていけると思った子供なんですね。ですからそこら辺をあの映画を見ながらちゃんとその判断して、ああ自分たちだったらやっぱりセータの側になるけれど、しかしセータの側に行ってれば場合によってはあえて死んでしまったりすることも起こっちゃうんだなっていうふうなふうに見てくれる人がいればよかったんですが。
if anything, Takahata doesn't praise liability. Rather, it's more of a demonstration on what happens to humanity during tough times. A cautionary tale that explains that there are no winners or losers in a war. Grave of the Fireflies serves as an educational piece that reminds us of the civilian perspective of war, which is why Isao Takahata wanted to make the film in the first place. According to him, too few people, including himself, remain that have seen the atrocities of war, and the people of the modern day are hardly aware of this traumatic past. And this is why there is an afterlife perspective in the movie. When Sita and Setsuko reflect on their hardships through the story, the film reminds people to be mindful of these forgotten days. And in the final shot of the film, Sita and Setsuko look on from a park bench from the afterlife, gazing into the distance. Skyscrapers and neon city lights gracefully stand in their sight, a world that could never be for them. But for us, a stark reminder, a remembrance to never forget our past. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing as well. If you want to watch more of such content, you can check out these videos. And yeah, that's about it, and I'll see you in the next video.